By the second Sunday of April 2014, Michael C. Ruppert was broke. The 63-year-old cop turned writer and firebrand gained fame by starring in Collapse, a 2009 documentary in which he predicts society's destruction. Publicity from the film was great. He went on a countrywide promotional tour, but compensation had fizzled out. By April, he was receiving just a couple $100 per month in royalties to supplement his meager Social Security checks. In an effort to simplify his life, Ruppert had gradually sold, tossed out, or given away nearly all of his possessions, which included an arsenal of guns, countless books, and government documents. All that remained was a collection of sentimental knickknacks, along with clothes appropriate for a man in his 60s. Button-up shirts, dark-colored slacks, a few flannels, a couple of LL Bean jackets, and a gray cowboy hat. Everything he owned fit into his burgundy 2000 Lincoln Continental. So when he made a plea for a place to stay early in 2014, a follower and friend named Jack Martin in Calistoga, California offered up a modest trailer. That's where, on the evening of April 13th, Ruppert committed suicide with a gunshot to the head. According to Ruppert's friends, his suicide at first seemed sudden and unexpected, a brash decision during a dark moment. But looking back over his life and final days, Ruppert's suicide resembles a grand finale, the end of a trail he'd been following for decades.
Beginning in earnest under President Clinton and expanding still further during the Bush Jr. and Obama administrations, the use of private contractors by the United States has increased dramatically. Bearing names like Titan and Aegis, they are the modern equivalent of the mercenary army.
Today, I can report that, as promised, the rest of our troops in Iraq will come home by the end of the year.
When President Obama announced the withdrawal of troops from Iraq, many Americans did not realize that thousands of mercenaries, funded by the U.S. taxpayer, would remain in place. Far from saving costs, these private contractors have repeatedly robbed the U.S. taxpayer for millions of dollars. But from a military intelligence perspective, they perform useful purposes. They establish plausible deniability. They further minimize congressional oversight. They bypass rules of war, such as the Geneva Conventions. And they create enormous profits for their benefactors. A case in point is DynCorp, whose clients have included the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Department of Defense, Department of State, the IRS, FBI, and of course, CIA. About half of DynCorp's revenue comes from the Department of Defense.
He stood up and he was talking about the war on drugs. And what Joe McNamara said, I saw this at a conference at SC, where I was to lecture on Wall Street's war for drug money just about a year later. He said, you know, when Richard Nixon started the war on drugs in 1972, the annual budget was like $50 million. Today, the annual budget for the war on drugs is $20 billion, and yet today there are more drugs in the country, they're less expensive, and they're of better quality than they were in 1972. Just let that sink in for a minute. One of the most important tools to help people survive is to re-legalize, decriminalize criminalized the growing of the hemp plant, marijuana. In World War II, the United States government plastered walls with posters that said "Hemp for Victory." And marijuana growing was encouraged all over the United States. It was subsidized. Why? Because the hemp plant produces rope. It can be made into cloth, and clothing can be made from it. It produces lubricating oils. It produces vitamins and nutrients. Drop the things that aren't working. The marijuana plant is one of the sturdiest plants around. You take care of it, you can grow it almost anywhere. It grows better in some places than others, but it's sturdy, and it's a source of food and fuel and fiber. And yeah, a little means to get high too. You know, so what? I don't care if the corporate beverage companies who want to keep marijuana illegal need to keep their stock prices up. Why make a plant that can help save millions of lives illegal? Everything is on the table. Until you start to learn how to think outside the box, you won't see the solutions that are right at your feet. Literally.
We don't agree with everything that happens in our agencies, so this is a little awkward for us, but you're getting into some sensitive areas. There are ongoing operations you're in danger of exposing. Operations that have taken months, years to set up, thousands of man-hours, millions to fund.
And how do you know that?
We know you were in Nicaragua. We know you saw Manassas.
Am I being followed?
What's your angle, Webb? Some governmental informants are scumbags?
Look, I was under the impression that you guys had something to say to me, but to answer your question, no. My angle is that the American government knew drugs were put on the streets to fund an illegal war.
What you want to say happened never happened.
Then why am I here?
American kids were gonna die in that war.
American kids did die, and they're still dying. Just not the ones you care about, apparently.
We'd never threaten your children, Mr. Webb.
What? What'd you say?
I am an investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist for about 25 years for daily newspapers. And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking. What my story showed was that the cocaine that was being sold in those neighborhoods was coming from mainly one source. And this one source was being used to finance a guerrilla war in Central America. The general idea of the CIA dealing drugs was something that the American mainstream press had never written about before. And that's why it prompted outrage among blacks, among drug reform activists, among politicians, by the CIA, by every federal agency involved in the drug war, because it showed they weren't doing their jobs, that it was a fraud.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
One dealer's name always came up when talking about crack's popularity. Freeway Ricky Ross became known as the Walmart of crack. Ricky's story has become as legendary as Tony Montana and Scarface, but with an even more bizarre twist. Ricky, who is currently serving time in the Texarkana Federal Prison, is scheduled for release in 2013. The prison denied me access with a camera, so I started interviewing Ricky over the prison payphone.
You know, a lot of people don't know what it's like to come in a house and there's nothing to eat. You know, to go to a supermarket and walk through the store and eat out of the cookies and things of that nature just to have something to eat. Cocaine came along, you know, and gave me a new horizon, I would say.
There's a new epidemic. Smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack.
I remember clearly one day in the late 80s, every single news network simultaneously running an identical news alert about the new, incredible, powerful, unbelievably cheap drug that was to sweep the nation.
This is crack cocaine.
Soon, every single black person living in the ghetto would sell his own mother for another hit of crack cocaine. It was like watching a strategically engineered ad campaign. Talk about perfect product placement. Did we mention it's cheap and strong and very addictive? Only $5 now, so stay away from it.
Let there be no mistake. This stuff is poison.
Crack cocaine epidemic. Crack cocaine epidemic.
Few street-level dealers have ever reached the legendary status of Freeway Rick with distribution that rivaled many Fortune 500 companies.
Freeway Ricky Ross was a young, aggressive, savvy, streetwise marketer who started selling cocaine, and then suddenly some major sources opened up for him.
At the height of
CIA fights drugs. CIA does not encourage drugs.
Well, I mean, it was actually one of the most monumental blunders of all time, if you think about it.
We have no evidence of a conspiracy by the CIA to engage in encouraging drug traffickers in Nicaragua or elsewhere in Latin America.
Deutsch was there because of the Gary Webb stories. The Gary Webb stories had sparked a national furor.
I would like to have Richie Ross's brother to speak, please.
The United States government turned their head and let this cocaine come into the United States of America.
Allow Gary Webb to have full access. This whole thing is orchestrated.
It was near pandemonium. It was about, I guess, 1,200 people in a standing room only in the auditorium, 2,000 people outside listening on loudspeakers. And it was very hard to keep control. I got called on finally, and I said to her very clearly, I was looking right at Deutsch.
I am a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, and I worked South Central Los Angeles, and I will tell you, Director Deutsch, the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
I was able to name operations.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country.
Army Security Agency during the Second World War. My dad was an Air Force aviator, B-17 decorated veteran of World War II, later became a radar intercept officer during the Korean War. He went to work for Martin Marietta, and I discovered that my calling was to become a cop, a Los Angeles Police Department officer. Which I did after graduating from UCLA. I had interned while I was an undergraduate at UCLA. I was assigned to patrol in South Central Los Angeles, the highest per capita crime rate in the city in the 70s. I became engaged to a career contract agent for the CIA, and it was then that the CIA tried to enlist me to become involved in protecting drug smuggling operations, bringing drugs into the country, and I refused. I blew the whistle. I was shot at, threatened, I was discredited, went through a very intense period. My fiance left me, and the chief of police at the time, Daryl Gates in Los Angeles, refused to back me up. So I resigned from LAPD at the very end of 1978. And I spent about 18 years doing other things, and I slowly evolved into becoming a freelance writer. I was a gifted writer in the police department, and that's why I was so valued in detectives, because I could write the case summaries and investigative reports. But I evolved as a matter of self-preservation and trying to find out what had happened in my life, because I didn't know all the pieces then, into doing research and reading news stories and analyzing news stories and writing to members of Congress, meeting members of Congress, and what was really a futile 18-year quest to expose the fact that the CIA was involved in the drug trade. In 1996, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Gary Webb, from the San Jose Mercury News, uncovered documents, was given documents that directly linked the CIA in the Iran-Contra era, which was just after my time, to the smuggling of huge amounts of cocaine into the United States, which helped precipitate a cocaine epidemic in Los Angeles, and which spread around the country, the Crips and the Bloods and all that bloodshed that arose.
I already knew that from the beginning of dealing with Danilo Blandon that he was sending supplies and things of that nature, computers and guns to Nicaragua to fight a war.
Ricky had already served a 5.5-year sentence for dealing crack, but was now given a second 20-year sentence after being set up by his former partner Blandon, while Oliver North walked away as a hero, wealthy and free to try his hand at politics.
Oliver North was being promoted by the Christian Coalition,
And to them, he was the last white hope that they were going to have for a right-wing Christian to run for U.S. Senate in Virginia.
During the 1986 Kerry Commission, Oliver North's crimes were exposed to the American public, and yet today Oliver North is not only a free man, he has his own show on the Fox News network.
It's amazing that Oliver North has his own TV show, and hopefully when I get out, I plan on having my own.
How does a federal agency like the CIA exert control over local law enforcement agencies?
The way it's done, which I saw firsthand at LAPD, there are networks called the Narcotics Intelligence Network, or now it's called Clearinghouse, where agencies who are doing a drug case don't step on each other's toes.
Every time the police go invade us, I know Rick used to get calls and say, move out, you know, they coming.
We actually saw that here in 1986 with major task force investigations of Freeway Ricky Ross. They had search warrants for 19 locations that were prepared one night, and by the time they got there the next morning, all 16 locations had been cleared out. And that means that obviously there was a leak. That's the way the CIA protects its share of the drug trade.
Just one night, I got a tip from Danilo not to go over, and just so happened to be the night that they raided.
The United States sentencing guidelines and the federal sentencing system rewards those who get others involved in criminal conduct, and that's what Blandone did.
During the exact same period that Freeway Ricky Ross was at his heyday, home values in South Central Los Angeles were tanking. People owed $100,000 on their home. The place was a war zone, dead bodies in the backyard, prostitutes in the front, drive-by shooting. I mean, it was horrible. And people walked on their mortgages because they couldn't sell the houses. And tens of thousands of homes were moved literally for 10 and 20 cents on the dollar after people abandoned their mortgages. We call that ethnic cleansing.
There was a greater plan to put churches, to put liquor stores, gun shops, and cocaine, drugs into the ghetto, into the neighborhoods, and drive the prices down. And they pretty much did a good job of that.
Real estate in California, which we consider Compton, Watts, East LA, South Central, where the drug-infested gang killing highest rates in the country, and families really start moving out of the inner cities to way out. I'm talking about 70 miles out of LA to get rid of. I'm talking about the foreman when they promising people that they gonna build up jobs and everything. Especially like in the 80s. There's a big thing about moving to Moreno Valley. We're gonna have all these big corporations come in. It never happened. People actually moved out there, end up losing everything because the big corporations never came. And then a lot of investors came back here and start buying property for so cheap prices. And now the property value is sky high. You can't even afford to live in Compton and Washington without spending $300,000 for a home that my mother then paid $9,000 for.
More than anyone else does. However, ask yourself this question. If you're going to have $1 million in cash, how much corruption can you buy at any level for that $1 million? And the answer has to be quite a bit.
On December 10th, 2004, investigative journalist Gary Webb was found shot in his apartment.
No, you lying.
No.
When?
Saturday.
Oh, man.
The internet was set ablaze with conspiracies of a CIA assassination plot, but overwhelming evidence of a suicide soon put the theories to rest.
Well, he used to tell me that he would come home at night and there'd be guys, you know, climbing up the pole late at night, 12 and 1 o'clock, and you know, at nighttime, and people following him around everywhere he goes. He has cars telling him, and his phone was tapped, and he was just saying that they were kind of like giving him the blues. You know, a lot of things were going on that he didn't really like. And he said it was the government, too.
By the way, the head of the DEA, his name is Rob Bonner, who's a friend of mine throughout the first George Bush administration, documented that yes, the CIA was involved with importation of a fair amount of cocaine with regard to the Iran-Contra, etc. But it just has to happen because of the money.
Let me understand what you're saying.
a ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America.
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
When Bush Sr. lost the election to Bill Clinton, everyone felt as if a new day were born in America. Now the peaceful liberals would rule, and the tired, corrupt Iran-Contra Reagan crew would be gone for good.
Problems today with President Clinton's book signing tour through the Southland. He appeared at SO1 Books in Baldwin Village.
I'm all the way from Moreno Valley just to see President Clinton. I love him and I love what he stands for.
But in actuality, he had this evil, crazy, maniacal person that headed up the war on drugs. Now that's the good guy getting the bad guy to do the bad work.
Yeah,
Scapegoat.
It's scapegoat.
That's
That's
all
what
it
we
is.
was talking about earlier. The scapegoat. Like we're the scapegoats. They all gotta have an scapegoat.
The media and the drug war have a long symbiotic relationship. During the last several years, Freeway Ricky Ross's legend continued to grow. A platinum-selling rapper using the name Ricky Ross tells stories that glorify Rick's life as a drug dealer. Ricky even had his own hour-long BET special, once again proving how a war-weary country has become immune to complete government corruption. However, in late 2005, Ricky did catch a break and got his sentence reduced down to a few years.
Ricky Ross is really a good guy who took advantage of an opportunity. He was an entrepreneur, but he's at the bottom of the food chain, so he went to jail. All the guys that violated the law, that ignored congressional sanctions on Iran-Contra, they're all in power. And George Bush, a guy who never succeeded at anything and is certainly not succeeding at this presidency, a guy who stole 2 elections, who has committed at least 10 different impeachable offenses, he's president of the United States.
Change the way you view the world and your relationship to it, because I believe this planet is alive, and I believe that we have to establish a basic fundamental connection with all life on this planet to achieve something called balance, or steady state, whatever you want to call it, sustainable, that doesn't pretend or aspire to overturn the physical laws of the universe or to make man a god, but to make man hopefully an intelligent creation living in harmony in God's universe.